Welcome back, focused learners, to today's Whiteboard Explainer. We're jumping right into Module 2 of the Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or, GBA Plus Community Training course. And today we are focusing squarely on anti-racism and anti-oppression, which we'll call ARAO. Look, if you're working in the community settlement sector, you already know that just applying standard analytical tools, well, it isn't enough when you're dealing with really complex human realities. So today, we're taking a magnifying glass to how we can actually dismantle systemic disparities rather than just, pointing them out. Okay, let's dive into this macro to micro session. Our 5 steps today are 1, moving from identification to dismantling. 2, confronting systemic power structures. 3, centering decolonial frameworks. 4, embedding ARAO internally. And finally, number 5, utilizing the OKCI assessment tool. Let's get started. Section 1. From identification to dismantling, moving beyond just spotting the problem. So, to truly utilize GBA+, we absolutely need a paradigm shift. Let's draw a literal contrast here. On one hand, we have GBA+. I mean, it's an incredible analytical tool, right? And its primary job is to identify systemic disparities. It finds the inequities. But, and this is a big but, identifying a locked door doesn't magically open it. That's where the other side of the equation comes in. Anti-racism and anti-oppression, or ARO, provides the ideological, historical, and structural imperative to actually dismantle those systems. Think of it this way. GBA Plus gives us the lens to see the problem, but ARO, that gives us the wrecking ball to literally tear down those structural barriers. And that brings us to a core definition you absolutely must internalize for this work: substantive equity. In our sector, a lot of well-intentioned service providers often confuse this with formal equality, the idea that we should just treat everyone exactly the same. But substantive equity actually means treating people differentially to address their specific structural barriers. We literally have to throw out those universally applied one-size-fits-all protocols. Why? Because newcomers arrive at our service stores from vastly different starting points. They carry different traumas, different resources, and entirely different systemic disadvantages. A one-size-fits-all approach doesn't just fall short, it actively fails to address structural exclusion. Moving on to Section 2. Confronting systemic power structures, mapping the invisible forces. To actually dismantle these barriers, we've got to zoom out to the macro level. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what ARO practices are designed to do. They don't just exist in some abstract academic theory. They aim to actively challenge and prevent specific ideological and organizational practices. We are talking about explicitly combating anti-Black racism, challenging settler colonialism, and eliminating institutional power imbalances. This is all about looking at the very foundation of how our community organizations operate and deliver services on a daily basis. To do this effectively, the source material prompts us with some deeply introspective questions. Take a look at this one. Whose voices are defining the community problem? Seriously, I want you to take a second and really reflect on that. Are the people actually experiencing the inequity the ones defining it, or are well-meaning administrators kind of projecting their own biases onto the community? Right, and following that up with another crucial question. Who benefits from the proposed intervention and who is inadvertently excluded? Furthermore, are we relying on marginalized people to constantly educate us on racism and oppression? Because true ARO application demands that organizations and their staff proactively self-educate, rather than constantly extracting that labor from the exact same people they're supposed to be serving. All right, Section 3, centering decolonial frameworks, shifting to relational knowledge. Now, within the Canadian context, any comprehensive analysis simply has to center the multi-generational impacts of settler colonialism. So let's make sure we share a common vocabulary here. What exactly do we mean by decolonial frameworks? Well, this means building authentic, non-extractive, and completely reciprocal relationships with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. Remember, organizations serving immigrants and refugees are operating on traditional Indigenous lands. We literally cannot facilitate newcomer integration without acknowledging whose land that integration is actually happening on. This requires some very specific behavioral shifts from all of us. First off, we must explicitly avoid colonial, extractive research methodologies when we design our programs. We need to honor relational knowledge systems that have existed for millennia. And practically speaking, we can deepen our critical awareness by utilizing existing tools. For instance, the source material highlights the really fascinating Ask a Knowledge Keeper video series, which is a fantastic resource that explores how to build genuine solidarity between newcomers and Indigenous peoples. Which brings us to Section 4, Embedding ARAO internally, turning the lens inward. So we've talked a lot about external macro forces, but now we have to look at internal accountability. So the crucial point is this statement right here. Organizations cannot effectively advocate for external equity if their internal culture is flawed. It's that simple. You cannot support the diverse needs of newcomers if your own internal structures are reproducing inequity and exploitation. True GBA Plus application requires us to take a really hard, honest look at our own human resources and organizational capacity. The data we have exposes the profound intersectional precarity of the settlement worker. It shows that the settlement workforce is overwhelmingly female, we're talking approximately 81%, and highly racialized. These frontline staff are earning modest wages, which means they are navigating the exact same systemic crises like major housing shortages and rapid inflation as the clients they are serving. And because this feminized and racialized care labor is systemically undervalued by funders, the sector as a whole is experiencing a huge sustainability crisis. Get this, among staff experiencing burnout, a staggering 75% report poor mental health. We simply cannot ignore this shared vulnerability.
Finally, Section 5, the OKCISI Assessment Tool, a practical audit for institutional change.
So how do we fix this? By moving from high-level theory to actionable change. Let's map out this blueprint together. The OCAS ARO Assessment 2.0 tool is a practical audit that asks organizations to evaluate themselves across 3 critical domains. First up, accountability. Does leadership demonstrate a real, tangible commitment? Are there dedicated resources for ARO initiatives, or is it just an unfunded mandate on paper? Second, implementation. Is ARO actually operationalized in your HR and recruitment processes? Are we consulting marginalized staff and giving them dedicated paid time for advocacy? And third, principles and culture. Does the organization officially recognize colonialism? Does the board of directors actually reflect the diversity of the community being served? Working through this matrix is what transitions ARO from just theory into daily institutional culture. Now, what's really interesting about this is the quote highlighted here. By applying GBA Plus internally first, organizations move beyond performative equity. I mean, think about it. If you don't do this internal audit, any external anti-racism campaign you launch is basically just window dressing. Strong operational foundations and actual staff well-being are the absolute prerequisites to sustaining transformative community work over the long haul. To wrap things up, I want to leave you with a final, pretty provocative thought to take back to your teams. If your organization's goal is to dismantle systemic barriers for newcomers, how are your own internal power dynamics replicating those exact same barriers for your staff? It is a tough question for sure, but honestly, answering it is the very first step toward achieving substantive equity. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions, and I'll see you in the next one.